So I recently started reading a book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow, which discusses the two systems that drive the way we think. System 1, as Kahneman calls it, is fast, intuitive, and emotional. System 2 is slower, more deliberative, and more logical. These are very simple analogies to describe the complex thought processes of people in everyday situations. What caught my attention though is when he started giving examples of what System 1 is. He gives off a list of 11 examples. Here is an excerpt from the book. In rough order of complexity, here are some of the examples of automatic activities that are attributed to System 1. Detect that one object is more distant than another, orient to the source of a sudden sound, complete the phrase bread and, make a disgust face when shown a horrible picture, detect hostility in a voice, answer to 2 plus 2, read words on large billboards, drive a car in an empty road, find a strong move in chess if you are a chess master, understand simple sentences, and recognize that a meek and tidy soul with a passion for detail resembles an occupational stereotype. This idea of having an ability to involuntarily read and understand situations oddly reminds me of a few weeks ago. I was on Quizlet studying for my psychology exam, and while doing the multiple choice portion, I began to remember that recollection instead of recognition proves to be a better way of knowing if you actually remember something or not. So I gave myself the goal of not looking at any of the 4 multiple choice answers while attempting to recall the answer to the question. So to correctly guess what the term is that is paired with the sentence, total certainty or greater certainty than circumstances warrant, I would avoid looking at the options below it and attempt to recall that the answer is overconfidence. Then I would glance down to find that overconfidence is there, and most likely get it correct. What caught my attention though is that in my indirect vision, I could tell the answer was there, I just could not consciously read what the answers were. This got me questioning about the possibility of subconsciously reading with my peripheral vision, then having that act as a way to, without conscious understanding, allow me to recognize an answer that I haven't seen, meaning that to an extent ignoring the 4 possible answers can't be truly done without covering them up. And if this is true, it opens up a whole gate for other possibilities for subliminal perception. I've had multiple people tell me that this is not how that works, that you have to intentionally focus on what you're reading in order to read it, but they never provided evidence or reasoning as to why it wouldn't work. I've compiled information and evidence from both sides, so I'm here to hopefully find out whether or not it's possible. Arguments and counter-arguments as to why peripheral stimuli can not only be processed, but in certain situations can be understood. Subliminal messaging, or subliminal stimuli, is any stimuli that fall below our absolute threshold, meaning is not consciously perceived but is subconsciously sensed. One method of subliminal messaging is called continuous flash suppression, which involves presenting a static image in front of one eye and masking it by rapidly flashing images in the other eye. Studies using this method discovered that people were able to solve simple math problems and even understand sentences without consciously seeing the problem or sentence. In the math study, participants were shown an equation subconsciously using CFS and then were asked to say the number that showed up on the screen. Participants were quicker able to pronounce the number that was the answer to the equation they were subconsciously shown. So using an example equation, 9 minus 5, people were quicker to call out the number shown on the screen if it was 4 as opposed to any other number. In the sentence studies, participants were told to press a button when they recognized seeing a sentence. They were then shown a sentence in one eye that was masked by changing colors in the other eye. It normally took participants a few seconds to recognize the sentence, but they always noticed the sentence quicker if it was relatively jarring. A sentence that read human trafficking was consciously perceived before a sentence such as riding a bike. This shows that before being consciously registered, the brain had absorbed the sentence and decided if it was negative or jarring before the participant was consciously aware that the sentence was even presented. With subliminal messaging being in the direct line of sight, it could very well be argued that this is completely different than subconscious reading with your peripheral vision, much like my instance with multiple choice questions. But would the ability to read from your peripheral vision work? I mean, peripheral reading is a well-known way to speed read. Instead of focusing on every individual word, you instead focus on every other word, or every 3 or 4 depending on how skilled you are. Could this ability provide evidence for the ability to subconsciously read using your peripheral vision? I would argue that alone it doesn't. Peripheral reading involves practice and skill and takes time to get good at, and the ability to read a long sentence also takes the ability to predict what comes next. There are some aspects of peripheral reading that provide some evidence, but not enough alone to prove it. But there is something that might: feature detectors. With feature detectors being so complicated, I'll let the American Psychological Association tell you what they are. They describe them as any various hypothetical or actual mechanisms within the human information processing system that respond selectively to specific distinguishing features. For example, the visual system has feature detectors for lines and angles of different orientations, as well as for more complex stimuli such as faces. Feature detectors are also thought to play an important role in speech perception, where their function would be to detect those binary features that distinguish one phoneme from another, also called feature analyzer. The ability for your brain to pick up information such as lines, angles, and shapes, which would allow them to recognize phonemes in a word, seems very possible for your brain to recognize not only phonemes, but entire words in your peripheral. This provides evidence that having the answers exposed in your peripheral can cause it to subconsciously make out what the words say, but only if you have seen the words enough times. Why? Well, for example, in order for your brain to recognize that the phonemes B, A, and T make up the word bat, the word bat has to be in your vocabulary. And for a multiple choice example, you had to at least at one point known that bat was the answer for something, because if not, bat might come to mind, but you would immediately discard it as a possibility. One last counter argument I have prepared is short and sweet, and that is the idea that your peripheral vision does not have a high enough acuity to make out phonemes of a word. Your macular vision consists primarily of cones, which allow for the clearness of what you see, whereas your peripheral vision lacks a lot of cones and consists primarily of rods, which are not built for sharpness and clarity. This piece alone provides enough evidence to potentially disprove the idea of feature detectors working for peripheral vision. With the subconscious being relatively new and constantly changing, it's difficult to say exactly how it works. Experiments with vision and subconscious can't really be conducted without equipment to scan activity in the brain, such as PET scans, fMRIs, and EEGs. With this equipment, we could see activity in the occipital lobe and hippocampus to possibly infer whether or not peripheral vision can influence memory. But sadly, without this technology, it's not possible for me to know for sure, only to hypothesize with what I know and hopefully get an answer through that.